So before we start, I just wanted, again, for those that might be joining, I'm Lisa Kopp-Johnson. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer of Deep Intent.
I'm Nicole Hamlin. I head up the planning practice at Butler Till. We're an employee-owned agency in upstate New York, and I lead the planning practice there.
Hi, I'm Andrea Palmer. I'm the CEO of Publicis Health Media, one of the leading healthcare media agencies in the US.
Hi, I'm Trisha Savio. I work at Eversana InTouch, and I lead our programmatic team.
Wonderful. So, going to open with a question that I know we've heard a little bit about, but I'm really interested to hear all of your perspective. Emerging trends. What excites you, and what do you think that the future looks like? So, Andrea, why don't we start with you, just diving in as to what that looks like.
Yeah, I think we are at a really exciting time. I always sort of say I got the best job ever because, in my 20-some years doing this, I've never had the same job for 2 years in a row. There's always something new and different. But I think the speed at which things have been moving the past couple of years and the promise of where things are going, this year, next year, it's going so fast, and the industry is actually realizing some of these theoretical and hypothetical great innovations in technology and in data, and they're becoming more practical. So things that have been, I think, over the past year have been so, pie in the sky or theoretical about, and been, very high level in terms of targeting better or driving better efficiencies when it comes to the use of data are becoming a little bit more practical and tangible in terms of applying some truly business-specific use cases to how we can solve challenges better through the application of some of these technologies. So I think it's an exciting time.
That's wonderful. Trisha, what about you?
Yes. So I think for me, we've been almost just waiting on the edge of our seats for the adoption of CTV through programmatic pipelines, and we've dipped our toe, and it really does feel like it's really here, and so it's been so exciting. I felt it a lot even in this past year, the conversations with our streaming partners, that they're so much more willing and able to push exactly what we want in premium inventory, and we've been on this ride of almost just redefining those words, premium and prime time. So we have led audience first. I know we talked a lot about that earlier, but making sure that we're reaching potentially a rare disease patient where they are, their own prime time, and setting the scene with clients that the word premium might mean the latest episode of Landman, or it might mean that nostalgic rerun. So we've talked a lot about the concepts of new and fresh, but also the aspect of nostalgia. I'm still watching old OC episodes, and that each have a place on a plan, and that each are premium in their own way. So just further adoption of all of that inventory into the tech and the pipelines of a DSP, so we get that measurement and that targeting. It does feel like it's finally really arrived, and it's a lot easier to do.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever heard that. My own prime time. I like that. Nicole, anything to add?
I would say that overall I'm just really empowered by the patient empowerment that I've seen and how that has been driving innovation across the board, whether it be in media and marketing, which we all live and breathe, or if it's just empowering that patient to have a more productive conversation with their doctor, and even moving towards resurgence and differences in how we treat point of care and target and treatment options and things of that nature.
So it's interesting. Could you expand when you say empowering the patient to have better conversations?
Yes.
What does that look like?
Yeah, so with things like personalizing the experience and really speaking to people across their journey, whether that be that they're starting to learn more about a disease that they just got diagnosed with, or they have gotten to a point where this treatment option isn't working for them anymore, we're giving them that content that can fuel the ability to speak on the doctor's terms. And I think one of the earlier panels mentioned that these doctors don't necessarily know all of these things because they're not living and breathing that diagnosis state or those treatment options every single day like the patient is.
Yeah, that's great. And that kind of also lets me think about, right, we talk about emerging trends, but then what our panel's about, which is also innovation, right? There's trends, but then there's true innovation, and then how does that innovation translate to the work that you do? So, softball question, what is innovation to you, right? Like, what does that mean? It could be like, yeah, guys, it means a lot of different things. So Nicole, why don't we stay with you?
I would say for me, innovation is thinking about a way to solve a challenge or a problem differently than it's been done in the past, and kind of opening up your mind to new opportunities.
Yeah, I think innovation is about looking where the puck is going and trying to build business models around how to be there and how to get ahead of it, or at least how to be kind of at the forefront of what's going on regardless of the space. And that can be, you know, strategically, it can be tactically, it can be operationally, but being able to kind of leverage what's changing and where things are going now and in the future, and to Nicole's point, doing things differently, and taking the risks and being willing to do things differently, because there's a lot of comfort in what's been done, but you can't innovate if you're, you know, applying old practice to new challenge.
Yeah. Go ahead, Tricia.
Oh, I would say, you know, it could be doing something new, but it could also be dusting off something that we've done for a long time, but just doing it in a sparkly new way. I heard someone earlier say that they're really excited about the future of HCP advertising and breathing a new life into it. And so just giving something kind of a second generation, and customization, I think, especially for pharma. So we don't have that luxury of, you know, doing it the way that someone has done it previously, and we pretty much have to do everything in a customized fashion, which ends up leading to innovation because of that customization.
Sure. Tricia, I know you've talked a lot about in our prep some of the work that you've done, or even some of the examples. Would you share with the audience some of those strategies and how you've brought that to life, and even some of the impact?
Yes, so I think one thing for us is we've formed a little niche in the rare disease and CTV intersection. I know someone mentioned earlier too that companies and brands who couldn't advertise in television at all due to how small their population was, how rare their disease state was, now, and really we dreaded COVID, but there were some good things that came out of it, is that adoption of CTV. 5 years ago, we were having conversations, 6 years ago, with disease states that had older demographics, and they weren't streaming. And we'd get pretty far in these conversations with brands, and then it just would kind of die off because that nervousness at that population is really not there. And now they're all there, and everybody's there. So bringing the opportunity to these rare disease states, we've been able to have a super targeted approach, show them the measurement, and really give confidence that their dollars are going to go a long way. Paired with the interactivity that is also so important now as well. So when we think of even integrating interactivity, it's coming even at the point of shooting the TV spot. So we're talking about when someone's shooting this scene, where would the QR code go, and where would it make sense, and what size is it, and how does that size relate to what we know about that patient population and what needs they have, and how likely they are to pull out their phone from their pocket and be able to do that next move. So through all that innovation, we were able to launch the first ever connected TV spot for our rare disease indication, and that was really exciting and kind of showed that we were headed on our way there.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Nicole, I know you were saying similarly about some of the work that you're doing, if you could illustrate for the group.
Yeah, so a lot of the brands that I work on currently are in the challenger space. They're not the biggest players, but they're trying to get to those treatment options that the bigger players are actively promoting. And one of the more recent examples I have is in the psoriasis space, which if anyone in the room, and I know from titles and some of the companies that are here, you all know this, it's very crowded and very loud on TV and video, and we were just not going to be able to break in there from a linear perspective. So similarly, we moved into CTV and did that in a more effective reach delivery to our target audience. But the innovation part for me came when we took a step back and said, what is something new or that we could exploit about this patient and how they want to receive media? And what we learned was that when a psoriasis patient has a flare-up, they tend to retreat inward, and they're using things like social media or gaming to connect with their friends when they don't want to physically be connecting with their friends. So we took advantage of that with a custom gaming platform that we then, not only did we have a custom game that allowed them to kind of beat their condition, but we also allowed for them to use that as a way to talk to their friends about how they're feeling, and extended our campaign through programmatic as well.
Wow, that's amazing. We talked a lot about AI throughout the day, and I think that's expected. But one of the earlier panels, I thought brought up such a good point about how the automation and AI gives back time and valuable time. And I also know that so much of what you guys do also feeds into creative. So my question is, when there's so much that is constrained by strict regulations, right? How are you balancing that compliance aspect of it with the need for creative and innovation? Andrea, can we start with you?
Sure. So I think it's always a misnomer that you know, that the regulated space, you know, you can't innovate, you can't do certain things. It really is about finding a different path to get there. I think a reality, though, in our space is that it has limitations kind of on the creative side. I think it was Erin who said earlier, like one of the biggest opportunities in AI is going to be in creative and versioning, because I think there's no limit to what AI can do in terms of helping us find different audiences and create different ways to reach patient populations based on signals that they're putting out into the universe, to use it based on different business rules that are being set, whether that's the evolving coverage of insurance, or whether that is you know, underserved patient populations, or what, you know, any number of kind of optimizations that can be done based on finding different targets of populations through AI. But when you're still sitting with the same ad unit, and when it really does come down to just having the same piece of creative, the same message to deliver in that space, it really is less relevant how much more targeted AI allows us to be, or how much more on the dime we can change things around and around, and how responsive we can be to different patient populations or physician populations, and if we still have a singular message or a flat message, or strategically that. So I think in a regulated environment, speed is the biggest challenge that we're faced with. But I also think it can also be the solution. The thing that we've had as the biggest challenge can also solve the problem at the same time. So some things that we're looking at is how AI can not only speed up processes, but actually drive toward more automation in regulatory submissions, and more automation in versioning, and faster review cycles and stuff like that, so that we can move with the speed of the patient, so that we can move with the speed of AI. Otherwise, we're just targeting a little bit better with the exact same messaging, and you're really not going to see a whole lot of added value when you do that. You can't possibly. You're still saying the same thing to the same people, and at the end of the day, patient populations are a finite group of people as it is, and each of those people are in a different part of their journey. So it is important that we become a little bit more individualized and personalized as we go on.
Yeah. Trisha, I'd love to hear your perspective.
Sure, I love the concept that AI, you know, isn't taking someone's job, but it's freeing them up to do something else. We've really encouraged our team of traders and all the junior members of our programmatic team to come to us in this show and tell aspect and show us some innovation they've done even on their junior level. And I think even like the DSP Cortex release, something like that, where maybe they're spending a little bit less time digging for this insight, they might find something new, and through these show and tell case studies that they've brought to the table, it usually results in some innovative way. Another trader didn't know how to look at data that way, or they had a before and after picture of you know, a data component that showed the rest of the team a really innovative way to adjust their media plan. So I think just freeing up some of that time uses their brain in a really helpful and thought leadership way that we'll all end up benefiting from even more.
Yeah. It goes exactly, in some ways you approach the answer the same way, right? It's about speed, it's about time, and then how do you connect that and then add that human layer on top of that. To pivot a little bit, right? We could keep talking about innovation, and Andrea, just to kind of go back to your point about there's just finite patient populations. So much of the future of healthcare advertising is also being shaped by a more diverse set of voices and different experiences. So with that, I would love to ask the question in the lens of how do you have to make sure that that innovation that you're driving towards in those patient populations is inclusive and also is addressing the needs of the entire patient population?
Yeah, I think you can answer that in a couple different ways. The first, you know, when you think about traditional like diverse targeting, you know, I think that sometimes can be a challenge for brands to wrap their heads around, because it becomes, you know, sort of splintering of the dollars and strategic focus areas and stuff, depending on the condition, it may or may not be something that the brand elects to prioritize. But nonetheless, it is really important to ensure that patient populations are reached and engaged with in ways that are going to be meaningful and resonate with them in different ways. And we see that across categories, that there's often patients that may over-index with a specific disease state, but under-index in terms of responsiveness to advertising. Yeah. So that's when we get into using, the tools at our disposal to understand not only who can be reached and how they can be reached, but how they should be reached. So certain patient populations are always going to be more responsive to different types of advertising or different types of content. Sure. Sometimes it's going to be about, being more in the point of care for certain patient populations, or even redefining what the point of care means. Does point of care even mean in the office? We see a 35% decrease in live office visits, and that number plummets below 50% in certain types of generations or different patient populations. So understanding, the engagement model of different types of patients across the spectrum is really, really important. So not only being able to find them through tools and deliver reach, but actually understanding, are they are there specific influencers that are out there that are actually creating a voice of authority or a voice of trust, and how do we partner there? Or is there specific content that's missing from a certain patient population, and how can we fill gaps there? But it's really looking at it with a lens of what's the missing link, or what's the barrier to changing that behavior, and how do we address that, versus just figuring out ways to spend dollars differently and go after audiences. I think that's the miss. I think a lot of people spend a lot of time figuring out how to spend dollars against populations, and that is rarely the issue. It's usually around how those dollars can be actually impactful, and sometimes doing small things in big ways can make a bigger impact with some of these audiences.
Yeah, I agree.
I would just add on to that, similar to, I think the last panel said that AI can help us look at reports and glean the trends quicker. It can also help us do that from a patient research perspective, and when we're talking like syndicated tools or those type of things, which gives more time for us to speak to the patients themselves, and specifically when it's in a diverse population group, to make sure that we're truly being authentic when we talk to them.
Yeah, and I also think even the human connection of how we're trying to reach them and being mindful of that, right? We heard a lot of that today, and I think that almost puts a bow a little bit on what you both are saying, because you have to reach, as someone said, it's terrible news if you're diagnosed, and you want to reach them in the right moment, but with the right messaging, right, with the right care. So that's in the lens of reaching patients. But when I also think, you all are leaders within the companies that you work at, I'd love if we could pivot even about that same idea, but how do you focus on leading and creating supportive environments that's inclusive and driving innovation in your own organizations as well? Nicole, why don't we stay with you?
Sure. So I'm fortunate to work at Butler Till, which is a women-owned company as well as employee-owned. So I have somewhat of a leg up of feeling like I am included already, even though I'm part of a diverse group. But I think what speaks to me is really being intentional about how women are included, and making sure that they're really included in all of the roles that you see, or all of the tiers of the agency. Even if you have those women in the top, if they're not filtering down to the bottom and really cultivating that growth path for their future leaders, then we're not doing a service for them.
Sure. Tricia?
Yes, I have a lot of young women on my team, and some of them are becoming parents for the first time, and some of them are, reaching different points in their own personal life journeys. And I think we've really leaned into just treating everyone like a human and making it normal to step aside for some of those parental duties and show them that you can be, have a career and also hold down a whole other corporation of toddlers on the side, and find a way to show them that, like, it's possible, you can do it, and not acting like Superwoman or anything, but making it a little bit more normal, peek behind the curtain. So I get a lot of questions about that from people who report to me, or people even sitting at a tangent for me. So always doing my best there from an inclusivity standpoint to make sure they have a path carved out for them.
Yeah. Andrea, as CEO, right, that idea is it starts from the top. So I'd love to hear, even just because Publicis is such a leader as it relates to inclusivity and opportunity in terms of how you instill that within your organization?
Yeah, so what's kind of cool is this year, all 5 of the media agency CEOs right now are women at Publicis.
Love that. I feel like that deserves a round of hand, like, guys, for the end of the day. That's amazing.
Yeah. And frankly, I think that's a testament to the success that women have been having in leadership roles, both from a mentorship perspective as well as a talent cultivation perspective. I hosted a panel earlier this week? Was it last week? What day is today? I think it was last week.
It's only Tuesday, so.
Right?
Yeah.
Good point. I hosted a panel last week with some individuals from my team who were representative kind of the population at PHM and all 3 women to celebrate Women's History Month. And one of the questions that we asked them was around, what some advice a mentor has given you. And what was really interesting was all 3 of the women cited different female leaders from from the past. Some of them had been with the organization for anywhere from 3 to 9 years, which in and of itself was really cool. But they all cited, both like immediate managers as well as incredibly senior people. Somebody cited Alex von Plato from 8 years ago, gave a piece of advice in her opening day and just sort of said, make space for yourself and don't be afraid to take up space. And that's something that 8 years later, 8 years into her career, she's still referring back to an impactful moment that Alex von Plato had. So I think, making the space to build that mentorship and to give people permission to take up space, I think is a kind of a cornerstone of how we try to treat people and how we try to make sure that people are living into their potential, and that good ideas can come from anywhere, and take a seat at the table, insert
every line that we say, but I do think it's
important and it resonates with people. And to see people think back to something that's 5 years old, 8 years old, 9 years old, you can see that some of that advice that they're getting from other female leaders and mentors is really impactful.
Yeah, it is. And I think oftentimes as leaders, right? We're just leaders. We always celebrate the big wins, right? Like the massive, the promotions, but I believe personally that small moments can define your career. Small pieces of advice can carry with you for 8 years. Mm-hmm. So what's a moment in your own journeys, and would you be willing to share with what was that kind of small defining moment that helped you pivot to lead you to this path?
I would build a little bit on what Andrea was saying around the small pieces of advice, and something specifically that stuck with me is when I was so nervous to give feedback to some of my direct reports because it was going to be a critical conversation, and I wanted to, with all of my being, shy away from that, but instead I leaned forward into it, and the person just said, "Oh, thank you, no one has ever told me that before. That was so kind of you to tell me." So that's something that I try to live by now as a leader, is that feedback is kind. Even if it's a tough conversation, you and anyone that you work with wants to know it now versus have it be buried for years and have the one person tell them years on when they could have done something about it now.
Yeah, make an impact. Trisha?
Yeah, I agree. There's so many things. I had a really amazing first boss at my first job, and she kind of just paved the way with so many little mantras that stick in my head still today, that you were just saying, or if you're in a room, speak. If you're in a meeting, you're there for a reason. So all those things I've tried to instill and cultivate, like a culture of people who feel welcome and to do those kind of things. A little win for me recently was the first trader I ever hired, and recently applied back about 6 years later to join our team, and noted that she thought of us when she thought of re-entering the space. And so that meant a lot to know that, she saw us as a focal area of how she wanted to continue on her career. And so that little win, I think I'll continue to think about in the future.
Yeah, that's how you made her feel. That's amazing. Andrea, I know you had said someone else's advice. Did you have any advice or any moments in your own career?
Honestly, some of the moments to me are seeing people that have moved on that I've managed or trained over the years and go into these incredible leadership positions in other places, and that they still talk about how they learn something different, or how you know, I or we are, you know, working on our team shaped kind of who they are as a leader today. So that's always one of my favorite things, is when someone leaves and does great things, and I get to know that I played a small part in that.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, my job is to get you to a place where I'm working for you, right? Like that's what success can look like. And speaking of success, if that's my success, success is something different for every one of us on the stage, and even the people that work with us. So, you know, I think it'd be important to understand, what is success for you?
I think success for me is knowing that I am doing something impactful and having purpose in my career. When I was younger, it was all about a linear trajectory upwards and like the next title, the next title. Since then, I have learned that I learn more horizontally before that next elevation point, and I really appreciate places that give me that breadth of opportunity, the opportunity to learn, the opportunity to work with wonderful women and other leaders, and the flexibility to have my life outside of home and make sure that I can show up for my children as well.
Yeah.
I think professional success is about finding, you know, constantly pushing to be uncomfortable, and finding those next spaces that are going to make you a little bit uncomfortable, because that's when you're going to grow. So I think that is always what I'm aspiring to do, and you know, nothing is constant except for change, right? So change is a really important part of growth, and change is a really important part of business evolution. So we talked about that earlier in terms of innovation. And then, you know, personally, I think I've learned over the years that success is also about being a well-rounded person. And it's about having interests outside of what you do at work, and having interests and you know, priorities outside of just what you're doing here, but applying, you know, things from your personal life to professional, or professional to personal, and just being a good, well-rounded person. So I think it's important to have, you know, both lenses when you're looking at, do I feel like I've been successful this year or this month or whatever.
Sure.
I was taught recently in a leadership summit that all leadership is moral leadership, and so I think it kind of encompasses what I've thought about for a long time. Is at the end of the day, getting through the project, I want to feel good about it, and success doesn't mean just like getting it done and gritting your teeth and everyone's unhappy afterwards, but we got it done, but really feeling like the team effort was there, everyone felt heard, and you walk away knowing that you did the right thing, even if some people didn't agree, or if it was a little bit tough. So I think success is hitting both of those marks at the same time, which isn't always the easiest thing, but that's what I strive for.
So staying on that point, right? Because that's success, but I love that in terms of moral. How do you make sure that also translates to all the work that you're doing for your clients as well, right? Because you're balancing a lot of change, things are moving quickly, and then how do you actually, to zoom it back up, how do you apply that to all the work for all the brands that you support?
Yeah, I mean, there's been times where, I know earlier we were talking about HIV as a sensitive disease, oncology, a lot of those disease states that are more sensitive, and we've had a spectrum of clients who are understanding all those sensitive, specific regulations, and some that said, you know, just do this, you know, retarget on DTC, even though we don't have an explicit opt-in or something. And you know, I've been the bad guy that said, we can't do that, I'm not doing that. So it was an unpopular opinion at the time to a big client, but you know, I sat down and wrote this big POV, and in the end, it was well received and respected. So I think sometimes pulling through the moral compass, the next time they asked a question, I think they knew they would get the answer that was truthful versus just what they wanted to hear.
Sure, and building that trust. Andrea, anything for you in terms of, right, like the personal, but also balancing what that change is as it relates to supporting your clients?
Yeah, I'm going to use the first part of my answer around being uncomfortable, actually, because I think all of our clients, big, small, brand, enterprise, are all on a journey. And that journey is hard. And that journey, they're in the middle of it in some way, shape, or form. And it's our job to be not only supportive of that journey in terms of, you know, giving them what they're asking for, but pushing them to evolve maybe faster than they're comfortable making changes. And I see our role in the agency world as having line of sight into kind of the entirety of the industry. So how we take, you know, maybe what could be an unpopular experience or an unpopular opinion, or push a client to go outside of something that they're comfortable with, but how we're, the only way we're serving clients and helping clients, and that's our job, is to be the agent of a client. And how we're doing that is by pushing them outside of maybe what they've been comfortable or been doing, or even what they're asking for. There's many cases where we're asked to do something by a client, and you have to be comfortable saying, you know, I hear you, and if that's where we decide to go, like, we'll go there, but in my experience, you know, I've been to this movie before, and we might want to consider a pivot, because I've got a lot of case studies of where this hasn't worked in the past. So I think you have to develop that relationship with the client to be able to have that dialogue, but I do think being able to help a client is almost more about being able to you know, push a client outside of their own comfort zone and do it from a place of authority and partnership, versus a place of who's right and who's wrong. But that's our job.
Yeah, it is. Nicole, anything you want to add?
I would just say, similar to how we were talking about how healthcare professionals are people outside of their jobs, I think it's important as agency people to also think about that for our clients and make sure that we're asking the questions and knowing them on a personal level too, so that we can drive not only success for their campaign and their brand, but also whatever success looks like for them.
Yeah, that's great. I can't believe it. We're almost at time. So I love doing this. I'm going to ask a question, and I'm very interested to see everybody's answer. If you could change one thing about the healthcare marketing industry today, what would it be and why? You want to start?
I would change the stigma, and I think we kind of did this today a little bit, that because we're in a regulated space, we can't do anything innovative, and using that as a cop-out for why we're behind the times in the healthcare industry, and instead using it as a constraint that we have to innovate against.
And I love what Nicole said. I think that's totally true. You know, everybody in this industry tends to be committed to this industry, and a lot of us have been at multiple companies in this room, and I think that's a really good thing, but that also is a really bad thing because everybody learns the same behaviors. So to that end, I think if I could change one thing, it's about, you know, risk tolerance and looking outside of this industry as the inspiration, and how can we learn from other industries around how to kind of adapt to human expectations and people's consumer-focused expectations versus follow this playbook and these like guardrails and handcuffs that have been put on from a regulated perspective. So risk tolerance, I suppose.
Risk tolerance, okay, for sure.
I think also just continuously chipping away at some of the perception of big pharma and showing those positive stories that, of course, I'm not naive to. There is a revenue aspect and all of that involved, but humanizing some of it so that the audience continues to be more receptive. I think the Deep Intent study from 2024, where it showcased, you know, people who are receiving ads being receptive and understanding why, I think that shows we've come a really long way. But I know sometimes, you know, the reaction to my job can be interesting. And so I think just continuously chipping away at that and showing the success stories and the stats and the number of cancers we've beaten and things like that will just help over time.
Yeah. And I'll end on this before we head to cocktails. Ads aren't ads. They're information, right? So I agree with you. I want to thank you all for joining. It's been a wonderful day. I think Chris is going to come up and say a couple more words.